Welcome everyone to the Black and Intellectual live stream show. I am Brian Lewis coming to you. It is Friday, March the 16th. This is the end of the week. It has been it's been a pretty typical week. Nothing too major. Nothing too catastrophic has happened this week. And I'm just glad for the week to be over. I'm glad I'm ready to take these 2 days off. I have some plans for Saturday and Sunday that I'm definitely looking forward to. And so let us get started with today's show. Now, I have 3 stories that I'm going to cover. The first story is going to be about the Brazilian councilwoman, human rights activist, who was murdered in an apparent assassination in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Really tragic story. I want to talk about something that I haven't talked about before, and I really haven't talked about enough. It's not because there's anything necessarily breaking with the story, but I want to talk about Flint simply because I want to keep Flint in the discussion because it has dropped out of the discussion in recent times. Because the corporate media, we can't depend on them to tell our stories, to get our news out. So we have to keep putting the news ourselves. And then I want to talk about what happened in Miami yesterday. The bridge that collapsed at FIU in Florida. So I definitely want to touch on that as well. So let's get started with today's program. And if you're watching this, like I say always, share it, like the video. I'll let everyone know that I am live. If you are even watching the replay, share the replay, and let's just build this thing out. And because we're growing, Black and Intellectual is growing. The YouTube channel is growing. Everything is growing. Everything is looking good. So I like where I'm at right now. So I have nowhere to go but up. So let's get started. Let's talk about the incident in Brazil. Now, the first article that I'm going to be reading to you guys is from The Guardian. And the title of the article, and everything is in the description box for the YouTube video, by the way. Protests held across Brazil after Rio councilor shot dead. So, on the eve of her killing on a downtown street on Wednesday night, so this happened very recently, a Rio de Janeiro councilwoman suggested that the death of a young man earlier in the week had been the latest act of police brutality. And she's quoted, and her name, by the way, just so I get that out of the way first, or just so I mention that first, was Marielle Franco. Okay, so she said, quote, "How many more must die for this war to end?" End quote. And, she specifically called what's going on in Rio a war between, because she's referring to state violence. So she's talking about the state and how the state is treating the citizens. Councilwoman Marielle Franco wrote on Twitter, "The death of the young man, Matthias Melo, age 23, received modest news coverage. As I read what happened to Miss Franco, as I read what happened to her, notice the similarities between what's happening in Brazil and what happens in the United States. Because there are some very striking similarities. And actually what happens in the United States is actually a lot worse. The death of so I read that already. He was, after all, a poor black man in a city where scores of poor black men are killed each year. Does that sound familiar? Many die at the hands of the police without much, if any, consequence. Does that sound familiar? And I said this is The Guardian. This is actually the New York Times. Because I'm going to read the Guardian article next. Miss Franco's killing shattered the cavalier attitude that prevails in much of this megacity in the face of rising violence. Shortly after 9 p.m., as the councilwoman was heading home from a meeting about empowering black women, assailants sprayed her car with bullets. They killed the 38-year-old rising political star and her driver, Anderson Pedro Gomez. The killings come nearly a month after President Michel Temir, and I might be mispronouncing his name, but Michel or Michael Temir signed a decree giving the military vast powers to restore order in Rio de Janeiro state. It was the first time a Brazilian leader has used a constitutional provision that gives the military primary responsibility for security in a state since the return of democracy in the mid-1980s. So what's happening in Rio de Janeiro right now is a quintessential police state. It's actually worse than a police state in many ways, because this is the military that has police powers now. So it's a military police state. Okay, and Marielle Franco was a prominent human rights, and this isn't from the article, this is just based on my research, a prominent human rights activist and city councilwoman in her in the area in Rio, and she was from the local community, so she came up out of poverty. As mentioned in the article, she was a black woman. She was a member of the local LGBTQ community and from one of the poorest neighborhoods in Rio, one of the poorest favelas. In 2016, she was elected to the Rio City Council under the Socialism and Liberty Party. So she was a socialist, she was a leftist, she was for her people, she was a member of the LGBTQ community, she was empowering women. So she was murdered. She was definitely assassinated. Here's the interesting part. She was a longtime critic of Brazil's police force, who have been linked to hundreds of killings and thousands of incidents of brutality in Rio's favelas. And every once in a while, I'll come across a story, an international story about what's going on in Rio. This is the first time I've covered what happens in that country, what happens in Brazil, what happens to Afro-Brazilians, and some of the plight of the Afro-Brazilians in that area. So let me continue with the article itself. Ms. Franco, who was elected to the city council in 2016, had been a vocal critic of the measure, saying that it threatened to raise bloodshed without addressing the root causes of violence. In recent days, she was appointed to play a key role on a council commission tasked with conducting oversight of the military intervention. So she was on a commission that was going to oversee this military intervention. And so someone who has a very strong leftist, very strong socialist, very strong voice in the community, and she was speaking out for the local people in that area, especially the local black and brown population in that area. You know, she became a target, clearly. As of Thursday afternoon, no one had been taken into custody. Surprise, surprise. But you know, let's give them a little bit of time. It just literally just happened recently. Let's see if anything is done. Let's see. Here's the thing: Rio and Brazil in general gets knocked for being a very corrupt area. But even if you look at America, America is no different. America is just as corrupt, and even some of the local areas in the United States, not like New York, Miami, Ferguson, larger St. Louis. You have America and these smaller populations within America that are just as corrupt as Rio. Maybe the corruption isn't the same. I'm not saying the corruption is identical, okay, but the corruption is there. The corruption is present. You know, it's not like especially if you read some of the articles that I've read. If you read the recent article from BuzzFeed about how the New York Police Department covered up crimes that should have gotten people, either arrested or at the very least lost their jobs, and it was basically covered up. If you read the DOJ reports from these different cities like Chicago and Ferguson and Baltimore, there's plenty of corruption to go around. So, we cover up our crimes, we cover up our corruptions here in America, and we like to say, oh, look at how bad Rio is, look at how bad Brazil is. I'm going to go over some numbers in terms of the number of people the police have killed in Rio in the past year, and you're going to see how it's actually worse in the United States. And as bad as it is in Rio, it's worse here. So let me continue with the article. Miss Franco grew up in Maré, a district in northern Rio de Janeiro that is among the largest in the city's constellation of favelas, largely impoverished districts that were initially settled by squatters. She gained prominence as a human rights activist, arguing that entrenched inequality and a trigger-happy police culture were at the root of the epidemic of violence that has afflicted the city for generations. She was elected to city council with more than 46,000 votes, a remarkable showing for a fresh face on the ballot. Ms. Franco was the only black female representative and one of 7 women on the 51-seat council. This is so they're quoting someone now. She broke barriers that many black women in the periphery thought were intractable. Said, and I'm gonna be butchering this name, but said Ilona Zebo or something like that, I'm not sure. Executive director of the Agarape Institute, which studies public safety policies. And this is the end quote. She represented hope for many or for so many women who never felt like they had a voice. Ms. Franco's death comes amid rising criticism of the military intervention in Rio de Janeiro. On Tuesday, United Nations human rights officials issued a statement expressing, quote, profound concerns about the intervention, which they warned could lead to human rights violations. Sounds very similar to some of the things the United Nations has said in America. The United Nations said back in 2016 that African Americans were owed reparations. That completely fell on deaf ears, but you know, the United Nations has been calling out the United States as well for the U.S. human rights violations. Okay, so let that be. I'm gonna keep repeating that in a lot of these videos when it can be brought up. Okay, so let me see if there's anything from this New York Times article. No, that's the New York Times article. So let me go over to the Guardian article that I mentioned at first. Well, first, before I do that, let me tweet out a few things and make sure. Let me make sure everything looks good. Okay, so that looks good. Okay. All right, so let me continue. This is from The Guardian. Protests held across Brazil after Rio councilor shot dead. Okay, Marielle Franco, known for criticism of police tactics, was killed in apparent assassination. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this was a hit. This was an assassination. And even though this occurred in Rio de Janeiro, this could really happen anywhere. Okay, and we have to understand that anti-blackness and critics of the police state are vulnerable. Whether you're a critic of the police state in Rio, a critic of the police state in Israel, a critic of the police state in Turkey or Europe or in America. Okay, the police state, you have all of these pseudo democracies, these governments around the world that pretend that they are democratic, but they are democracies around the world really are failing, especially some of the larger democracies. The democracies are failing left and right because what's happening is capitalism is corrupting the integrity of a lot of these countries, and capitalism and class and race are all forcing countries, these democratic societies, to make anti-democratic and undemocratic decisions and undemocratic moves. And people who speak out against this, you know, and this is a broad coalition of people. You will have white people, you will have black people, but what you will typically find is the voices from the communities of the disadvantaged, the voices from the communities of the historically oppressed, the historically underrepresented, they typically face the greatest threat of retribution from the state. Okay, this is usually universal. Not to say that, white people can't, get it either, but typically you will find black and brown people are the most criticized and are the most attacked. Look at here in America, look at the difference in the reaction between Black Lives Matter protests and protests justified. And I want to say this just so people don't take me the wrong way. Justified protests, rightful protests that I support regarding not state violence, regarding gun violence and gun control in America, things that people should be protesting about. But notice how different the coverage is. Notice how you don't see the tanks. You don't see the tear gas. Okay, there is a very noticeable difference in reaction within society, within the media, among the politicians. There is a noticeable difference based on the color and the class, to an extent, of the people doing the protesting. They've even done studies, and I'm sure this is probably even true in Brazil. Okay, they've even done studies in America that has shown that Europeans are more supportive of protest when it's Europeans protesting, when it's white people protesting versus black people. Okay, so this is real. This schism is real. Okay, and this forces society to have different reactions. So let me stop, ranting, and let me go to this Guardian article that I've been building up since the beginning of this live stream. So the article starts, and I saw there's a oh man, I wish I had put this picture on the live stream. There was a huge protest in Brazil, in Rio. Protests were held across Brazil after a popular Rio city councilor and her driver were shot dead by two men in what appears to have been a targeted assassination. And this is my conjecture, and I can largely say this because I don't live in Rio. It was probably the cops. I'm just putting it out there. It was either the cops or it was people who support the cops. It was one of those groups, or not even, maybe even not the cops. It might have been the military. Okay, it was either the police, the military, or supporters of the police and military. Okay, it was fascist right wingers most likely who killed this sister. Okay, who killed this young activist, this young woman who rose up through the ranks, came out of poverty, and was active in her community. And the right-wing fascists, whether you're talking about America, Israel, Brazil, or Europe, they're terrified of black and brown leftists. This is a consistent theme you look across the spectrum, regardless of what country you're looking at. They are terrified of black, brown, especially women, but even the men too, because they're terrified of the men because the men we tend to be very aggressive in our approach. Okay, and so whether you are a black or brown man or woman, if you are a radical leftist, they're not going to like you. Okay, so let me, because stuff keeps coming up in my mind as I'm reading this. Man, this aggravates me. This really, really aggravates me. Marielle Franco, age 38, was a groundbreaking politician who had become a voice for disadvantaged people in the teeming favelas that are home to almost 1/4 of Rio de Janeiro's population. Okay, where grinding poverty, police brutality, and shootouts with drug gangs are routine. Something else. Rio and Brazil in general has the largest population of black people outside of the continent of Africa. Okay, more black people live in Brazil than any other Western country, more than Europe, more than the United States. Brazil has a large Afro-Brazilian black population. Okay, and they are railroaded. they are completely shut out. They are completely railroaded. Again, regardless of wherever you look, whether it's America, Brazil, wherever you look, they make sure they keep black people at the bottom. They make sure they keep black people at the bottom and keep everybody else on top. Okay, so continuing with the article, Richard Nunes, Rio's head of public security, said there would be a, quote, full investigation into the deaths, which came despite the military taking charge of policing in the city last month after a surge in violence. Two police officials told the Associated Press that two men in a car fired 9 shots into the vehicle carrying Franco and her driver, Anderson Pedro Gomez. On Wednesday night, a press officer in the back seat was injured but survived, the official said. So there was actually somebody else in the car with them. Both officials said it appeared Franco was targeted. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International condemned the killings, while friends, colleagues, and politicians paid tribute to Franco. Let me give me 1 second. I'm about to do something here. Okay. On Thursday afternoon, crowds gathered outside Rio de Janeiro's council chamber chanting, quote, "No one step backwards," end quote, ahead of a ceremony in honor of Franco inside. Many wept as her coffin was carried inside. The spontaneous demonstration brought together union members, feminists, leftists, and residents of the city's poor communities. Camila Pontes, age 30, she's my age, a communications officer, sheltered from the hot sun under an umbrella. She said, quote, "I feel lost, without hope. It is a very tough blow for anyone who fights for justice, for freedom, for equality." Franco was a gay black woman who defied the odds of Rio de Janeiro or Rio's politics to win the 5th highest vote among council members. When she was elected in 2016, she was an expert on police violence and had recently accused officers of being overly aggressive in searching residents of gang-controlled shantytowns. A member of a leftist party, Franco was also known for her social work in favelas. She was in her first term in office. And this is another quote from a communication student named Jefferson Barboza, age 21, who worked with Franco at the state legislature. He said, "She was a symbol of the politics we believe in. I have never been so scared. People are shocked with what happened. They did this to Mari, one of the most popular lawmakers in Rio. What will stop them from doing this to others?" So this is tragic, and this just goes to show you the uphill battle that leftists. Let me take it away from race for a split second. The uphill battle that leftists across the globe face. There is a incredibly powerful, incredibly well-financed, in the millions, and if we're talking about globally, billions of dollars, propping up fascist right-wing movements, fascist right-wing politicians, and fascist right-wing platforms. This is going on everywhere. Okay, I keep bringing this up because a lot of people do not want to talk about this. A lot of people want to sit back and pretend that this isn't happening and that this isn't a major threat to black people and minority groups, ethnic minority groups, black people, brown people, all over the world. Okay, this is a threat to democracy all over the world. You cannot have a society predicated on the domination of one ethnic group over the other and then sit back and call yourself democratic when you don't extend those democratic rights to other people, to other groups of people. And if you do, it's a democracy in name only. It's a democracy in theory. It's not really a democracy in action. Okay, because you are really threatened by those people having democratic power. You cannot be a democracy, a true democracy, and a democracy in name only at the same time. And when politicians are killed because of what they believe in, that is anti-democratic. It is anti-democratic. It is fascist, especially if these people, if the culprits are who I think they were, and if the culprits really were people from either the police or the military, okay, that is complete and total fascism. That happens in dictatorships. Okay, so the agenda that we need to establish, okay, is that we have to establish an agenda, and we have to establish a mindset, okay, that says that this is not, whenever things like this crop up, this is not normal. This cannot be considered democracy. This needs to be called what it is. We need to stop playing games and act like this rise in right-wing fascism and white supremacy all over the world isn't a threat to tens of millions of people across the globe. And people want to sit back and just let it happen. A lot of people, I was about to say a lot of white folks, but even though you have black people who don't take this seriously. You have brown people who don't take this seriously, because class is entered into the equation. Economics is entered into the equation. And what you will find is you will typically find a lot of black and brown people who have privilege, and black and brown people who have a little bit of class privilege and a little bit of wealth. They will co-sign a lot of fuckery. And that's a problem. And I see that all over the place too. I see that in America. You have your so-called coons in America, and you have your apologists and your collaborators in America. But it's not isolated to America. You have apologists and collaborators in Europe. You have apologists and collaborators in Brazil, in Africa. Okay, so you have not only the right-wing problem and the fascism problem, but you have the black and brown buffer of the class buffer, where you have some people who have slipped through the cracks and who have been allowed to enter into the right wing, the right wing machine, so to speak, for the lack of a better term, and they feel disassociated from the poor, disadvantaged masses that they originate from. Okay, so this needs to be called out. This is a problem. This is a problem all over the place, and I feel bad for bad for the people of Rio. I feel bad for for Miss Franco's family, her friends, everybody she was fighting for, and I hope they stay in the streets. And just looking purely at the pictures of the protest, it looks like it easily several 100,000 were out in the streets. And from what I heard, people were protesting all over Rio, so it might have gone over 1 million at some point in time. I haven't actually looked up to see what the actual numbers were. But yeah, this is tragic, man. And this could honestly, the reason I'm talking about this story is not only because I like talking about international stories that affect people of color, but I'm talking about this story because this could happen here. This does happen here. Matter of fact, and not could, it does. Okay, I did a story not too long ago, I want to say like a month and a half ago, about Mohied and Moye, the former Black Lives Matter activist, known for jumping over the tape at the white supremacist rally and yanking the flag out of the white supremacist hands. He was found dead. Now they don't know what happened to him, but they don't know what happened to her either. They're speculating. What happened to her is just as much speculation as what happened to Moye. You have other Black Lives Matter activists who have been murdered. Darren Seals. That was definitely an assassination. With Moye, we're not really sure. you know, but with Seals, this dude was burnt in a car. Okay, he was definitely murdered. That was definitely a hit. So even though she was a city councilwoman and a lot of the Black Lives Matter people weren't in office, okay, the similarities are striking. Okay, so there's not that much of a difference between what's happening right now in Rio and what happens in the United States to black activists here in the United States. So, we might be separated by language. We might be separated by culture. We might be separated by vast distances in land. But we're really not separated a lot of times in our societal placement. We're not separated in our societal placement, and we're not separated in terms of what we face with regards to state violence and white supremacy. We are very, very much, we have a lot in common with them when it comes to that. We have a lot in common with them in terms of some of the things that they advocate for. She was a leftist. She was a feminist. We have leftists and we have feminists over here in the United States. So we it's there's nothing more I can really say about the story, but yeah, I just wanted to definitely talk about that on this Friday show. So let me continue. Let me continue with the stream. Hold on one second. Thank you for the love on Periscope. Thank you for the love on Periscope. If you guys, I'm not sure where you guys are from, but if some of you guys listening right now are from Rio, or from Brazil, keep me abreast of this story, what's going on with this story, because I want to stay on top of this. Because what we're trying to do here in the States is, and this is something that I've been talking about a lot recently. Okay, we need black media, like independent black media. I keep harping on that because they're not talking about this in the mainstream media here in America. Like, I can turn on CNN, I can turn on MSNBC. They're not going to talk about this. They're talking about Russia. They're talking about a bunch of other stuff. Now, I have seen some publications online, like the New York Times and CNN. I've seen some U.S. publications write about it just because, honestly, they want the clicks. See, and I own my own blog. I own blackandintellectual.com. You guys can go to that, my blog, my website. I know what people do for clicks. There's this whole thing known as SEO, search engine optimization, where you can write an article, you can target keywords, and you rank high in the search engines on the front page of Google for those keywords. So a lot of these publications, the New York Times, I'm not saying they're being malicious, but a lot of times they see something trending on social media, which is where they get a lot of their news. Okay, they see something trending on social media and they're like, yes, we have a large platform, we have high domain authority, so we can write an article about what happened to this black woman in Brazil, and we can rank high in the search engine, and we can get a lot of clicks, but we're not going to say shit about it on television. We're not going to say anything about it in the actual mass media. And so that's something I noticed they do a lot. They'll write about it, but they won't talk about it on television. Okay, where they reach a lot more people. So, definitely share this video, because I haven't seen too many people doing videos about this. So I want to get the word out that this video is out there, and that at least some people in the alternative media are talking about this. So let's continue. I want to talk about Flint, Michigan. We want to talk. I just talked about a story that doesn't get a ton of not going to get a ton of attention in certain quarters. Flint, Michigan in the United States is an example of that. Now, Flint, Michigan, when the whole story really became big a couple years ago, it was a big news story in some areas of the corporate media. Specifically, I have to give a shout out. I think Rachel Maddow has, I don't want to say fallen off, but I think she's lost sight of a few things because since Trump has been in office, she's been on the Russia bandwagon. Okay, heavy. Okay, but giving kudos to her, she talked about the Flint water crisis more than most people in the corporate media. Okay, a lot of people didn't talk enough about it, and the story didn't stay in the media long enough. So, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the story, let me bring up some information about it. So, the Flint water crisis began in 2014. Okay, when drinking water, which is very important, it's deadly important actually that you have good drinking water. I could go to a corner store, okay, down the street from where I live, get a bottle of Fiji water, and Fiji water is so daggone good that mess can take away headaches. You know that tells you the importance of good water and how important good water is. Like that mess can literally Fiji water is so good that mess can take away a headache, or and without even taking a Tylenol or an aspirin or something like that. So in 2014, in the city of Flint, Michigan, the local and state officials did something incredibly stupid. Okay, they changed the source of the water supply from where it was before, which probably wasn't even that clean. It definitely wasn't Fiji clean, but it wasn't corrosive and deadly either. They changed the source of the water from where it was before to the Flint River. The dirty, corrosive Flint River, which nobody wants to drink from. I don't know if there's a single river in America that you want to drink out of. This isn't the 1700s, before the Industrial Revolution destroyed our environment. There was a point in time in the past where you could probably drink the water from the river. That's actually where people got their water from. You know what I'm saying? That's not possible today. You'll die doing that mess in some areas. Okay, so over 100,000 people in Flint, Michigan were exposed to very high levels of lead. So they were basically poisoned. Okay? And I have a story here. I have several stories that I want to read to you guys. One is from the Huffington Post. One is from NPR. One is from the New York Times, and another one is from Detroit News. I don't know if I'm going to get through all of these articles, but these articles are all in the description box of the YouTube video. Okay, that you can either watch live right now or you can watch the replay in the future. Okay, so let me hold on one second. Give me one second. I'm retweeting some. I'm retweeting some information that I'm live right now. So that looks good. All right, we're good to go. So let me continue. So yeah, Flint, Michigan. Like I said, over 100,000 were exposed to very high levels of lead. Okay. The switch led to an outbreak of Legionnaire's disease and pneumonia. And some people think that. Well, let me read this first. The Legionnaire's disease has been directly attributed to the deaths of 12 people, and it has affected 87 others. And the numbers are probably even higher than that. I don't believe necessarily the numbers. Okay, I believe they're playing down the numbers. because some people, I've read some articles that think that people have been diagnosed with pneumonia who actually have Legionnaires. And this isn't counting all of the children who drunk the dirty water and whose brain development and things like that might have been affected from being exposed to the corrosive lead water. So let me read this article from Huffington Post. The title of the article is "Don't Forget About Flint, Michigan." Okay, the article came out yesterday, and this was honestly the inspiration for me doing this video, or to at least talking about this in today's live stream. It was written by a brother named Philip Lewis, and he has my last name. With the news cycle in hyperdrive ever since the inauguration of President Donald Trump, and even after that, it feels as though most Americans have forgotten about one of the most horrifying examples of government malfeasance and environmental racism in recent memory, the Flint water crisis. Okay, it was heartening to see the Michigan city get some attention as a result of the Will and Jaden Smith's eco-friendly water company, which has vowed to donate water to the beleaguered majority black city. But it reminded me that what happened in Flint, an hour north of my hometown of Detroit, has largely faded from the public eye. I have friends in Flint, many of whom are still wary of drinking the tap water, even with the free filters provided by the state. And they came out last year and tried to say the water was still good to drink. I wouldn't trust that. I would not trust that. Okay, because you'll start drinking the water now, and then 5 years later, 5 years down the road, 6 years down the road, you're coming down with all sorts of illnesses and diseases. And by then, they're just going to pretend they don't know what's going on, and the Flint water crisis had nothing to do with it. So I would not trust that. So the people who are wary of drinking the water still in 2018, definitely, I'm there with you. Okay. When the cameras and celebrities left, thousands of poor, now poisoned Flint residents, including infants and children, remained, and we've all but abandoned them. On April 25th, 2014, Flint officials made the cost-cutting decision to switch the city's main supply from the Detroit system, which is where, that's what I was saying earlier, that's where they were getting the water from before, Detroit, to the Flint River. Initially an effort to save $5 million. Okay, so they were being cheap. The decision proved to be more costly than they had thought, obviously. And shortly after the switch, residents started to complain about discoloration in the water, a taste of, quote, urine, and an odd smell. Rashes and hair loss were also a common complaint. There are pictures. I even have this in the live stream. Okay, if you look in the live stream, and you'll see a picture of a person holding up a bottle of yellow water. Okay, yellow water, deep yellow, not like sort of beige, deep yellow water was coming out of the drains, was coming out of the fire hydrants. Okay, it was coming out of people's people's faucets. Okay, water that smelled like urine. Water that smelled like feces. This is what was being given to the people in a majority black city. And they try to pretend, first of all, and this is the scandal. This is the scandal of the Flint water crisis. They knew ahead of time that this was happening, and they didn't do anything about it. The flip occurred in 2014. They knew ahead of time because they were passing messages to each other. This is what has come out after the fact. They knew this was going on, and they continued to let it happen. You have had local officials who have been charged But the governor, the white governor, a former governor, because he stepped down, Rick Snyder, nothing is happening to him. He's being protected. So you have these local officials, okay, falling on their swords whether they want to or not, being held accountable for a decision that was made at a state level, not just a local level. Nobody is rushing to the, oh man, I'm getting heated. I'm getting really upset. Just the more and more I'm reminded of this story. Okay, the anger that I had in 2016 is just coming back. So let me continue with the article. The river water was dangerously corrosive to the city's pipes, so much so that a General Motors plant stopped using it because it was eroding car parts. That's how poisonous and corrosive this water was. It was eroding metal and aluminum, which is a metal. So over a year later, researchers found evidence of dangerously high levels of lead in the water, which finally prompted the city to take action. While we won't see the long-term health effects on a city filled with lead poisoned individuals for another 10 to 20 years, some side effects of the contaminated water have already occurred. An outbreak of Legionnaire's disease, which I mentioned earlier, caused by the water crisis, has killed a dozen people. A study discovered a, quote, horrifyingly large increase in fetal deaths and miscarriages in Flint in recent years. So babies dying in the womb, not even being born. That's gone up. Flint is one of Michigan's poorest and blackest cities. People of color represent 57% of the population and were the primary victims of a system that failed them. Would this have happened in a predominantly white suburb? Hell no. Now, this does go on in other parts of the country. I don't know. I would have to check to pull up the research to see the levels of lead, but dirty water is a problem all over the country because America's infrastructure, quite frankly, is trash. America's infrastructure is garbage. And that kind of plays into the next story I'm going to be talking about about the Miami bridge collapse. But even with that case, that's a bad story because it's just a sad story. But then too, that was new architecture, that was new infrastructure. You know, so this is showing the relationship between the people of Rio de Janeiro, and the people of Flint. The stories are different because one is a story of environmental racism and government negligence, which I believe is somewhat deliberate. I'm not saying that they deliberately poisoned the population, but they knew ahead of time what was going on and they didn't act on it. So even if you want to say that they didn't deliberately poison the people and they didn't deliberately know that all of this was going to happen, even after they knew it was happening, they didn't move fast enough, then they kind of drug their feet. Which is why people are in trouble right now, which is why Governor Rick Snyder should be charged with something. Okay, but this is showing the relationship between the people of Rio and the people of Flint. The people of Rio, and even a story I'm not talking about, but the people of Ferguson. And how black people, regardless of the country you're talking about, are facing a lot of the same problems. We have more in common than we realize. Yes, we have differences, like I said, language and culture and things like that, but we have a lot in common too. So let me see if there's anything else from this article that I want to read. Give me 1 second. I'm scanning the article because I have 3 other articles that I want to touch on. Let me read the last paragraph, then I'm going to go to the next article. The hectic and often outrageous news cycle has desensitized us to such a degree that the poisoning of an American city in the 2000s is almost an afterthought. Just because it didn't happen in New York, Washington, or Hollywood doesn't mean these citizens' problems are less important. So there's the class dynamic coming into this. The class and the racial dynamic. The city has fallen out of the headlines, but don't forget, Flint hasn't had clean water for more than 1,400 days. They still haven't replaced all those damn pipes. We have money to funnel to billionaires. You have Congress passing laws. Doug Jones, who everybody was cheering, even me, happy that he beat, Roy Moore in Alabama. But you have these Democrats colluding with these Republicans to pass more deregulation, more bank deregulation in Washington. You have billions of dollars being given to the military. It's like the Tupac line, the Tupac verse from Keep Your Head Up. We have money for wars, but can't feed the poor. We have money for wars, but can't fund the right pipes in Flint, Michigan. This is disgusting. This is absolutely disgusting. But let me continue. We owe it to the city's residents to keep talking about it, and the government owes it to them to continue to do something about it. So that's the article from Philip Lewis, who's an editor at the Huffington Post. So in research for this article, I was looking at some other recent articles about Flint. And let me see which one I want to talk about first. Let me talk about this one from the New York Times. Now, this is an article from 2016, actually March 25th, 2016. So this article is a couple years old, but it's an important article. It's called "The Racism at the Heart of Flint's Crisis." Okay, an important news report makes clear the principal cause of the Flint water crisis: the state government's blatant disregard for the lives and health of poor and black residents of a distressed city. The report, released Wednesday by a task force appointed last year by Governor Rick Snyder to study how Flint's drinking water became poisoned. It became poisoned because of your decision. You don't need a study to figure out. This is what they like to do. Okay, when they fuck up, pardon my language, but when they fuck up, they like to start doing these studies and try to pretend we don't know what's going on. We have to do this long, months-long, or possibly even a year-long study to try to figure out what we already know. There's no study that needs to be done with. Let me just finish reading this. The report released Monday, okay, became about figuring out how Flint's water became poisoned by lead. Okay, makes for chilling reading. While it avoids using the word racism, obviously, because they don't want to be held accountable for their racism, it clearly identifies the central role that race and poverty play in this story. Quote, Flint residents who are majority black or African American and among the most impoverished of any metropolitan area in the United States did not enjoy the same degree of protection from the environmental and health hazards as that provided by or to other communities. Let me stop right there. That was from the report. Let me stop right there. I did a video for a live stream not too long ago about a small town, much smaller than Flint, a small town in Florida known as Africa Town. Or was it Florida? I think it was Georgia, actually. Okay, basically the city is known as Africa Town. Okay. And again, it was a very similar story about environmental racism. You had a plant, a factory, okay, that was very close and nearby Africa Town that was literally releasing pollutants into the air, so much so that there was so much ash being released into the air by this plant, it would come down and settle on top of the roofs of the black people who lived in Africa Town, a town established by former slaves after the end of slavery in 1866. So you had these black people who had been living in this town since the end of slavery, since the 1800s. At one point in time, the town was 10,000 deep. It's now less than 3,000 people because so many people have left. Okay, because of cancer. You have a lot of people, because of the environmental racism and the environmental pollution of the area and the complete disregard by wealthy capitalists, okay, before the environment and for the people in the local area. Many of them are coming down with cancer now because of the pollutants in the water and the pollutants in the air. So Flint, Michigan is another example of this. Let me continue. Mr. Snyder, a Republican, and many Republicans in Congress have tried to deflect and minimize the state's responsibility for the Flint crisis. Let me repeat that. People have died, and many more people have been affected. They have been poisoned by the state. And you have Republicans, Snyder himself, who I want to call something. I want to say a particular word, but I don't want this video to get flagged, okay? You have Snyder, who's a Republican, and you have the Republicans in Congress protecting Snyder and deflecting and saying that the state is not responsible for what happened. Mr. Snyder has said the crisis represents a collective failure. It's a collective failure, of local, state, and federal governments. And congressional Republicans like Jason Chaffetz of Utah have sought to pin virtually all of the blame on the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, which many of them oppose for ideological reasons. The task force cut through to the truth and said the agency most at fault was the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, which reports to who? Mr. Snyder. So the report that former Governor Rick Snyder basically authorized, because he authorized this report, this task force, came back and said, no, you're responsible, Mr. Well, really said the fault was the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. But they report to the governor. They report to Snyder, not the EPA. The agency failed to instruct officials in Flint, which was under state control at the time. That's another thing. That's another thing they leave out. The state government in Michigan, which at the time was being led by Snyder, actually used a law they passed. What's the name of that? Oh man, it's on the tip of my tongue. It's basically a law that a lot of these state governments, led by Republicans and led by right-wingers, they've been passing these laws on the state level all over the country that gives the states executive power to take over local governments. And they're doing this because they're seeing a lot of these local leftist governments, these local, mostly black and brown governments, passing very liberal, very progressive, very leftist laws. And they don't like that. These states don't like that. So they're coming in, passing these executive privilege, executive power laws and statutes to take over these local governments. So as this Flint crisis was going on, as this article states, the governor was literally in control of Flint. The state government was in control of Flint. The mayor of Flint, Michigan, who was a black woman at the time, if I'm not mistaken, she didn't even have control over the city itself because the city had been taken over by the state. But they want to say everybody's responsible? The fuck out of here. That is BS. That is total BS. But are they being held accountable? Just like in Rio. Hell no. They're not being held accountable. This is a human rights violation. That is how this should be. This is how the independent. I talk about the independent black media a lot. From here on out, let this be known. Okay? Let this be known. From here on out, the Flint water crisis needs to be regarded by the independent black media as a human rights violation. That is how we need to talk about it. That is how our dialogue needs to address this. This is an attack on the human rights violation of those black people and the white people even who live in Flint, Michigan. And I believe even I don't know if it was the UN, but one of those international human rights organizations, was it Human Rights Watch? It might have been Amnesty International. One of those global human rights organizations even said as much. Said that the right to clean water is a human right. That's not a privilege. It shouldn't be. The right to clean water is a human right because it is needed to survive. You can't survive without water. The majority of your body is made up of water. If you don't drink water consistently, you can die. Oh man. Let me man. Let me let me take a breather right quick. Let me pause for a second, family, and I'm going to retweet this video. I'm going to take a few seconds to retweet this video. While I don't have any water beside me, but I need to. Man, do I need to. Whew. Give me 1 second. I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still live. Oh man, sorry. Let me continue. How long have I been going on? This stream has been going on for oh wow, over an hour. Okay. So yeah, let me get through this. Where was I? I got so caught up in that rant, I kind of lost my place. Let me see the agency. The agency continuously belittled the concerns of local residents and independent experts and lied to the EPA. They're talking about the agency that answered to Governor Snyder. Okay, so they lied to the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. They belittled local residents and were completely indignant to the concerns of independent experts, telling it that Flint was properly treating the water. That's what they were telling people. That's what they're called, emergency managers. I just saw the term. So Mr. Snyder's office comes in for harsh criticism for relying on the department's assurances that the water was safe despite mounting evidence that it was in fact poisoning residents. The emergency managers Mr. Snyder appointed to run Flint city government decided to switch the city's water source to the Flint River from the Detroit River. Yeah, so let me repeat that because this is important. The emergency managers, the people who had taken over the local government, Mr. Snyder appointed to run Flint city government, decided themselves to switch the city's water source to the Flint River from the Detroit water system and later refused requests by the residents and the city council to reverse that decision because it would cost more money. Oh, man. All of these people need to be in prison. Or at least charged with let me just continue. Let me continue. Actually, no. That's mostly it for that article. And if you want to read that article, like I said, the title of the article is "The Racism at the Heart of Flint's Crisis." Okay. Actually, no. Let me read the last paragraph. I was just reading something from this article. I'm gonna read the last paragraph, then I'm gonna go to the last article about this story, then I'm gonna move on to the last story. Congress, which has refused to invest sufficiently in the nation's public works and has been antagonistic to the environmental protections, must also learn from the crisis. For years, poor and minority communities have suffered disproportionately from environmental degradation. Examples include the poorest neighborhoods of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. That's another example. And the breach of the levees in that city. Communities in West Virginia that faced chemical spills, and even Washington, D.C., which had its own lead contamination crisis about 10 years ago. Most of these disasters could have been avoided or mitigated by aggressive government action. And even this isn't mentioned in the article because this is from 2016. Even when you look at the what were they called, the DACA protest, with what's happening with Native Americans, okay, and how they were protesting, they wanted to prevent their water supply from being contaminated. And guess what happened? There was an oil spill. There might have been multiple oil spills in that same area that the DACA No, hold on. Let me pull that up. I'm getting my protest mixed up. Hold on one second. No, yeah, not DACA. I'm completely. I apologize. It's not DACA. I completely misspoke. I'm getting the protest mixed up. No DAPL. That was the hashtag, not DACA. DACA is something completely different. DACA is regarding immigration. It was the no DAPL protest and the Dakota Access Pipeline protest. Okay, and it was on the Sioux Reservation. So that you can include that, the Standing Rock protest. You can include that. That's also an example of environmental racism. Okay, so whether you're talking about no DAPL and Standing Rock, and let me see Standing Rock. Let me see how many oil spills there's been. Let me see oil spill. Yep, yep, I knew it. I knew it from CNN and National Geographic from last year, November of last year, 2017. Keystone Pipeline spills 200 gallons of oil. And the CNN article, Keystone Pipeline leaks 210 gallons of oil. So they protested at Standing Rock the oil pipeline that Hillary Clinton was very tepid in saying anything about. And Trump definitely didn't say anything about. And Trump, I think, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, he was invested in that company. Okay, the company that was doing the pipeline. Okay, so you had a lot of people, even Obama's reaction was very weak. A lot of these politicians, their reaction was piss poor. Okay? They protested the spilling of oil because they didn't want their native lands destroyed. And guess what happened? Over 200 gallons of oil spilled on their land. We live in a country that does not give a damn about the environment. And actually, it's gotten worse under Trump. Trump is going around selling off, not reservations. He's selling off land, like land that was set aside for parks and things like that. He's selling these lands off so people can drill there. This is just terrible. So I went off completely on a different issue. This last article that I want to read about Flint, the title of the article is Snyder Partly to Blame for Flint Crisis. University of Maryland report says. This article is a recent article. So the last article I read was from 2016. Okay. This article, I just got deep on Periscope. This article, well, deep for me. Deep not for a lot of other people, but it's deep for me. This article came out yesterday from the Detroit News. Snyder partly to blame for Flint crisis, which that's been known for years now. That's not new news. So let me read the article. Governor Rick Snyder is partly to blame for the Flint water crisis for failing to ensure a rigorous investigation by state agencies and for not declaring an emergency sooner. According to a new report by the the University of Michigan. Okay, the declaration from the University of Michigan's School of Public Health also cast criticism on the Flint Department of Environmental Quality for failing to notify the public of Legionnaire's disease outbreak and refusing to cooperate with the Genesee County Health Department investigation. The report funded by the that's why I thought about Maryland. See, I was reading this article last night. I knew Maryland was in here somewhere, but it wasn't the University of Maryland. The report was funded by the Bethesda, Maryland-based Beaumont Foundation. So it was founded by a foundation based in Maryland. Okay, but the actual study was done by the University of Michigan. 5 public health lawyers in the Network for Public Health Law said the governor, quote, bears significant legal responsibility for his role over the state agencies in charge of protecting public health. The governor had adequate legal authority to intervene by demanding more information from agency directors, reorganizing agencies to assure availability of appropriate expertise where needed, ordering state agencies to respond, or ultimately firing ineffective agency heads, the report stated. But he abjured either due to ignorance or willful neglect of duty. The complaints from Flint's residents were, quote, not hidden from the governor. So the governor knew about the complaints. This is pissing me off. The governor knew about the complaints. He had the emergency managers take over the city government in Flint. So the state was in control of the city government in Flint because they didn't want a bunch of black people running their own town. Let's keep it real. Let's tell it like it is. They didn't want a bunch of black liberals, bunch of black progressives controlling a city and passing progressive policy, potentially. So they took over the city, installed these dictatorial emergency managers, and then tried to sit back and pretend they didn't know what the hell was going on. And I'm honestly thinking, and people might call this a conspiracy theory, but if it's a conspiracy theory, it is founded in data. It is founded in fact. I'm partially wondering if this was done intentionally. Like literally, I'm seriously thinking about if this was some deliberate diabolical shit that they had going on in Flint as some sort of test run. At this point, you can't rule it out. I mean, yeah, you can say you don't know what their agenda was. We don't know that. But we know that they knew what was going on. They knew there was a problem. They knew there were complaints. And the state was in control of the local government. That all of those things are facts. Just so you know. So, let me tone it down because I'm yelling. Let me tone it down. Where was I? I lost track. The city's water crisis occurred from April 2014 to October 2015 when Flint's water source was switched to corrosive water. So we already know that. Let me see. I'm skipping down to the next paragraph. Researchers believe the water conditions also contributed to the growth of deadly Legionella bacteria, causing a 2-year outbreak of Legionnaire's disease cases in the Genesee County area. The report also took to task the emergency managers' roles in the crisis as they, quote, undermined the local government's ability to respond to an emerging crisis. Once the emergency manager took over, city agencies could no longer act. Although state, federal, and county agencies retained legal authority to intervene. The report comes as State Attorney General Bill Chouette pursues involuntary manslaughter charges against Health and Human Services Director Nick Lyon and State Medical Executive Eden Wells. Preliminary hearings for Lyon and Wells are underway and are expected to wrap soon. Snyder needs to be there. Not there in the audience. He needs to be there on trial. So, I'm not going to read the rest of the article. All of these articles, like I said, are linked in my YouTube video. All of the articles can be clicked on and can be read in full at your discretion. So we are an hour and 20 into the stream. Let me do the last stream, the last story. Okay. The Miami Bridge. I'm gonna try to get through this quick because there's not a whole lot that's known about what happened. They know what happened. They don't know how it happened. So in Miami, Florida, yesterday, a 950-ton bridge, which was built to last 100 years. I don't know who screwed this up, but a 950-ton bridge that was built to last 100 years and be able to withstand a hurricane. It can't even stand on its own, but it was built to withstand a hurricane. Collapsed, killing at least 6 people and injuring 10 others. And this is a tragic story. My heart goes out to the family. Like I said, they don't really know how it happened. They're still investigating. What happened. But this is from the Huffington Post. At least 6 dead after new pedestrian bridge collapses over cars in Miami. Multiple cars and people were trapped under a newly constructed bridge at Miami's Florida International University, FIU, after it collapsed Thursday. Officials said there were at least 6 fatalities, including 1 student. They didn't expect to find any more survivors amid the rubble. 10 victims were taken to Kendall Regional Medical Center. The Miami-Dade Homicide Bureau is leading an investigation into the collapse. Governor Rick Scott said investigations are being conducted at the local, state, and federal level. He promised to hold anyone accountable if there is evidence of wrongdoing. So that's sort of the gist of what happened. There were more than 100 rescuers on the scene after it happened. You know, search and rescue, medics, and anybody that could help was there. The Miami-Dade police chief, Juan Perez, said this is going to be a long, long process because to get through that rubble and the pieces of concrete laying there, it's not going to be an easy task. I wasn't reading anything. I was watching the news. I was watching CNN and MSNBC when this happened. And somebody said, I was watching it and somebody was talking about how this was rushed. Like the construction of this bridge was rushed. And they built the bridge because a lot of people were dying at this very busy street that the bridge was built over, because the bridge was built to provide a walkway over top of the street so pedestrians could use the bridge, the walkway bridge, the pedestrian bridge, to walk to and fro at the university so they wouldn't have to cross the street, because the university controls buildings on both sides of the street. Right, so you have students that try to get from one end of the street to the other end of the street, and apparently some students had died in the past crossing the street, and so they built this bridge to alleviate that problem. And look what happened. So, not much else is known, and yeah, like it's a terrible story, but when these things are built, they have to be built the right way. They can't be rushed. You can't do it the cheap way. It has to be done properly. Okay, so that's going to be today's show. I'm going to get some rest over the next 2 days. I will be back on Monday, same time, around 12:30 p.m. And you can follow me at @_blackintellect on Twitter. Follow me or join my Facebook group, by the way. It's called Independent Black Media Think Tank. Okay, join my Facebook group. Go to my blog, www.blackandintellectual.com. Black and Intellectual is growing. I have this huge article that I'm reading. I'm tired. I need to stop talking on this live stream. I have a huge article that I'm writing right now. It's going to be 5,000 words long. It's going to be about Black Twitter. It's going to be sort of like a love letter to Black Twitter. And I'm going to touch on a lot of different things in that article. I'm writing that article to be sort of like the go-to piece, or at least it should be, if it ranks the way I want it to, the go-to piece about Black Twitter. So be on the lookout for that. I will be posting that hopefully next week, but I'm not sure how long it's going to take because that article is going to be extremely long. So I want to make sure it's done right. And yeah, just check me out on Wednesday, or not on Wednesday, on Monday, and I will see you guys next week. Have a nice weekend, family.